Welcome to Stream of Conscience, brought to you by Democracy for America, Fairfield County, where we believe that change is possible and you can make it happen. I'm your host, John Hartwell. Our guest today is State Senator Anthony Musto, who represents the 22nd District covering Trumbull and parts of Bridgeport and Monroe. Anthony previously served in Trumbull on the town council and as town treasurer, and was first elected to the state senate in 2008, where he co-chairs the Human Services Committee and is vice chair of the Select Committee on Children. Anthony, welcome to Stream of Conscience.
Glad to be here.
So, Anthony, you've been in the state senate now for 4 years, and the last 2 years were pretty combative, I think, with the fights over the budget and all that was needed to be done to overcome a $3.3 billion deficit that Governor Malloy was facing when he came in. And there were several pieces to that. There was tax increases, there were deals with the state unions, there were cost savings. How is that going now?
It's been going well. Actually, the first 2 years, the budget was a lot bigger of a problem. We had a Republican governor, and she wasn't really working well with the Republicans themselves, so there were some problems there. We were able to work with Jody Rell, though, and get a budget passed. It was late, though. It was very late. This year, or the last 2 years, I should say, since we do biennial budgets, the process moved a lot more smoothly. Governor Malloy came in early and set down some ground rules. He went and he said, we need some concessions from the unions. He said that we need to make certain cuts. We need to make programmatic changes that will lower the budget. And we did do some tax increases as well. So it has been moving along. You know, we need to make sure the revenues keep coming in as they are, and we need to make sure the cuts hold up as well.
I haven't seen the very latest figures, but it seems that some of the savings perhaps haven't quite materialized as we wanted, and that the budget is running a little bit below where we had hoped it to be at this point. Can you talk to that?
Well, that's really always the case. I mean, the budget is a prediction. The amount of revenues that will be coming in is a prediction. Sometimes the cuts are more predictive than other times. I mean, you can always say, if we fire 100 people, we'll save $2 million, or something like that. What you can't always say is some of the things that we've done regarding, for example, health care, where we say that the state employee unions, retirees, people like me who work for the state, whoever, who are on the state insurance, if we institute certain changes to the way we get our health care, the way we buy our medication, things like that, that those savings will, in fact, materialize. Both the Republicans and the Democrats have had sort of the same issue with that in the proposals we've put forward. And so some of those things might even just take a little more time to materialize once people get used to going to the doctor on a regular basis. You know, I've got a little bit of a cold today, actually, so I apologize for that. But, you know, when I have to do certain things in order to save money in the long term, health and wellness type issues. Those are the kind of things we're looking at, and some of them might take a little longer than others to come to fruition.
If I remember correctly, one of the provisions of the agreement that was reached with the state unions when we were negotiating givebacks and cost-saving measures was to get to incentivize them to go to the doctor on a more regular basis. And I think that well over 90% of the state employees have actually signed up for that provision.
Yes, exactly. If we don't do the wellness steps, it costs another $100 a month for our insurance.
That's a significant
it seems
incentive.
So, for example, you have to go to the dentist every 6 months. That prevents things like tooth decay, which could cause you to lose a tooth, have to have oral surgery, gingivitis, etc., that are more expensive.
Much more expensive.
Get a health checkup. Get a checkup every couple of years. Women have different provisions, mammograms, pap smears, that sort of thing. And these are all preventive measures that, over the long term, will lower costs. So that is our expectation. They're not all going to happen in 1 year.
Right. And in addition, of course, the state is gearing up for the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, also called Obamacare.
Yes.
What's going on there?
Right now, you know, being the chair of Human Services, that's what I worked on last year to a large extent. We worked with the Commissioner of DSS, Department of Social Services, that is, and the administration, and we came to the conclusion that it was premature last year to really implement Obamacare. We don't know what's going to happen in the federal election.
Right.
We expect certain things, but we don't know what's going to happen. Assuming that Obama wins and he's able to maintain some control of the legislature, the Democrats that is, maintain some control, then we'll have a better idea of what the federal government is going to do. So much of our money for these issues comes from the federal government. So even if Obama does win, what the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare are going to do is still a little bit of an open question. How much money they're going to give, under what conditions, whether the states opt in, et cetera.
The Medicaid provisions today are for people who are disabled, adults who can't find a job, and for people who are below the poverty line. And I believe that is funded 50-50 between the state government and the federal government. Is that correct?
In Connecticut, it's roughly 50-50. Other states, it's much more. Connecticut and other states that are considered wealthy states get about 52%.
Okay.
But some states get close to 80%.
Wow. So the provisions of the Affordable Care Act is going to vastly increase the pool of people who are receiving insurance or actually receiving subsidies for insurance in order to participate in the insurance market, which I'm sure is going to be a good thing for the insurance companies up in Hartford. And if I remember correctly, that's mostly funded by the federal government, much more than the current Medicaid allocations.
You're correct. What we have to do is set up a health exchange in the state. And people will be buying insurance or facing a penalty on their taxes. And in order to buy the insurance, there are different levels of insurance, just like there are now. They've sort of done the bronze, gold, silver, and then they have a platinum level.
Okay.
So there are different things. One of the things we're wrestling with is who's going to be in those levels. The current Medicaid population is probably going to be in the silver level, but whether you get in at 133% of the poverty level or 200%, 185, those are really the three levels that the states get to choose. And then what types of people are in those programs. The thing it will do is, as you point out, it will bring a great deal more money to the state. The federal government will be picking up a larger tab. The other thing it will do is it'll take what was normally, or I should say formally, pressure off of some of the state programs, the Husky program, state retiree program, et cetera, because these were all funded with state dollars.
Right.
And now it's going to change to shift some of those costs to the federal government.
Oh, wow. Didn't realize that.
Yeah. Frankly, I'm a little concerned about some of it because at that point, the state really does lose a great deal of control over what we can do with the money and how we spend it. But the federal government will, when they step up and do what they say they're going to do, and that's one of the things that we hope and expect they will, we'll have to keep a close eye on them and then keep in touch with our federal legislators, congressmen and senators.
So your committee in the state legislature is deeply involved in these issues?
Oh, yes. It's the lead committee on this issue.
It's the leading committee. And if someone is unsure of how things are playing out, wants to get more information, where should they go? What should they do? Well,
like I say, at this point, last year, we didn't do it. Again, it was premature. The Office of the Healthcare Advocate is involved. The Department of Social Services is involved. OPM, which is really the administrative arm of the governor's office, is involved. The Social Services Committee, Human Services Committee is involved. So there are a lot of moving parts, but we're all trying to get to the same place, which is the same place I think the federal government is going. How do we take care of the people who are sick? How do we make sure that they're not resigned to going to emergency rooms? If you get an infection, if you start with a cold, right, it turns into pneumonia, it becomes much more critical. These people end up in emergency rooms, and we're paying, even in Connecticut, hundreds of millions of dollars to hospitals for taking care of people who show up in emergency rooms with things that could have been treated with a round of antibiotics.
So it's going to be a brave new world.
Yes.
And I think all of this goes into place in January of 2014, so just a little bit more than a year from now will go into effect, but obviously there'll be an implementation period where people are able to sign up and find out more information. Is there one website that we could point people to today to say this is a place where you'll be able to find information?
No, as yet the state doesn't have the plan.
Okay.
We do, again, have to figure out what the plan is going to be. We're heavily reliant, I shouldn't say we're heavily reliant on the federal government in this matter, but we are waiting to see what they're going to do. Sure. Because if things change, then all of our plans have to change as well.
Of course, right. And we don't know, sitting today, a little more than 3 weeks out from the federal election, where things are.
It's a little bit frustrating.
It's a little bit frustrating.
It's a little bit, we're trying to make plans, and sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. In this case, we just can't.
Now, another huge issue that's on the docket at the moment is educational reform in the state. And the governor's been advocating for some changes. Can you talk about those?
Well, the governor did come out with a plan last year. We, in the legislature, scaled that back somewhat. You know, I was not entirely happy with the plan that came out myself, but I wasn't on the education committee, so I can't really talk about all the minutia that changed from the governor's plan to the current plan. I think the governor was on the right track when he was saying that the focus really needs to be on the students and how they learn. The thing I was most concerned about for myself in the plan was really the testing that would so heavily influence how teachers get promoted and paid.
Right.
You know, the standardized testing, I think, is good, so we get an idea of where we are in the country, whether we're doing the right things, whether we're not. But to really focus on individual teachers with standardized testing, I think is both unfair to the student and the teachers. You know, these kids, for example, if we test them in 3rd grade, we don't know what happened in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd to this individual student. And now in October or November, you are telling this teacher, these kids have to do well on this test. Well, they might not have the foundation. 2 months is not really enough to get everybody to the same level. And it's not fair to the children, so it's not fair to the teachers for that reason. It's not fair to the children to put this much pressure on them to say this is the most important thing in your educational career is how you do on this test. It's bad enough we do that to them in high school with the SATs, for example, or after college, if you want to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, you have to take different tests. Right. But as 3rd graders, 5th graders, 7th graders, 6th graders, whatever they are, it's just not a great way to make them focus on just getting the answers to this test right. I think it's much more important, especially in the lower levels, to teach them how to learn, to teach them to question things and to enjoy the educational process.
And I don't think anyone would disagree in terms of how you want to handle students, what it is that you want to do with the students. I think the larger question that people are wrestling with, and I think there's huge areas of disagreement around the country, is how you evaluate the system as a whole and how you evaluate the individual parts. And people are always trying to say, well, you know, look at teachers aren't evaluated in the same way you would be if you were on the job somewhere else. I mean, all of us have been in the private world, and you know, you have your boss, and your boss says, here are the things you're supposed to do, and you do them well, you don't do them well, you get evaluated, you get promoted, or you get, you know, put into another job, you know, if that's what's necessary. And the larger question is how we evaluate the school system as a whole, because we know that in many areas the school systems are not doing that well. I mean, you represent parts of Bridgeport and you represent parts of Trumbull and Monroe. And I'm certain that the educational outcomes in those 3 places are quite different. So the question is how we move these things forward. What's the right way to evaluate the system?
Well, that's a huge question,
yeah,
in fact. But one of the things we need to remember is that public education takes all comers. Every student who is living in Connecticut has the right to a public education. In business, for example, you can somewhat monitor your inputs. If you're, I mean, just take a simple example like making steel. If you don't like where the iron's coming from, or it's not good quality iron, you're not happy with the carbon, you can find another vendor. You can go somewhere else and compete for the inputs. Right. But if you have to take every piece of iron, every piece of carbon that comes through the door, if you have to take every piece of fuel to fire your furnaces that comes through the door regardless of the quality, then you're going to have lesser outcomes. It doesn't mean that we should in any way limit what kids can come in or in any way restrict where they go. But we do need to keep in mind that children are different. They come from different areas. Some of them have problems at home. Some of them have learned at different rates, right? Some blossom in different times. Whether one parent works, if they have one parent or two parents, whether the parents are making enough of an income. A lot of the kids, especially in some parts of Bridgeport that I represent, are on federal assistance food. Some schools 100%.
Yeah.
And for some of those kids, that's the only food they get is really at school, and they get food sent home with them in backpacks over the weekend.
Right.
You know, trying to teach a kid who is hungry is vastly different from trying to teach a kid who has well-educated parents who are engaged with them and can feed them and keep them warm. And we need to remember those sorts of things. Saying that Bridgeport is a failing school district or whatever, I think is really the wrong focus. We should really be focusing on what we can do to bring these kids up to the level of other people. English language learning, huge issue in the inner cities. Yeah. Even Danbury has a huge population of Portuguese speaking as a first language. If your parents don't speak English as a first language, if they can't help you with the English and the reading and the math and the social studies, how do you expect those kids to compete really with some place like Trumbull or Monroe?
So there are also alternative school ideas out there. So we see the charter schools which use public money, but in a sort of a private setting, if you will, because the teachers are not inside the this regular union structure that the public schools are driven by. And we also have magnet schools. And I know that in Bridgeport there are 2 magnet schools already, and then a third one being established on the border between Trumbull and Bridgeport. Can you talk about that?
Well, I've never been a big fan of charter schools. My concern with charter schools is not necessarily the quality of the education, because the people who are hired there, they have the same commitment to children, I think, and the same background generally as teachers, although they're not required to. I think the charter schools do a pretty good job of trying to get the same level of quality in. But there are some problems with them. First of all, the outcomes. Again, you have to deal with the inputs, and charter schools are voluntary. So when notice goes home to a family that says, do you want to apply for a charter school, again, if the parents don't speak English, they don't understand the difference between the schools, they may not even apply. So although charter schools do take a sample is really the wrong word, they take an across-the-board blind lottery.
Right.
They don't get to choose their students. But a lot of students just simply don't even apply who don't have parents who, again, are engaged, or who don't have parents who speak English. So they already get parents who are engaged with their children's lives, and that's a huge predictor of how these students are going to do in school. The second problem I have with it is, as I point out, public education is someone that takes all comers, but they're also public. They're using public money to give the same education to everyone. If we start funneling those dollars into different schools, because these schools are saying we have better outcomes, which, first of all, I'm not sure they do. But second of all, you're taking money away from a public system that is designed to help everyone, every child, and funneling it into a system that is really designed in a different way. I've had this conversation with charter schools. They know my position on it. I'm just not convinced that that's really the way to go.
And magnet schools, which are, again, a different model.
Magnet school is a little different model. It is public, again. So we do have some of the same problems with the magnet schools. You know, if you have a child who's very driven toward zoology, for example, you have the new magnet school that we've been talking about. That child may really be driven in the first place to go to that magnet school, or the parents may be driven to try to get that child into the magnet school. That, again, is not going to happen in a lot of instances.
So it's, in some respects, we're dealing with the motivation of the parents in order to steer their children to the right place. And you're saying that a major problem here is that we have parent populations that perhaps aren't as motivated or not as knowledgeable about how to use the system.
I think that's right.
How do we overcome that? Because we need to try out different models. I think everyone would agree that you don't want to stand still. You want to continue to innovate and to seek better ways of doing things. And magnet schools and charter schools are offering different possible models. And I would agree with you, if you look at the charter school world, that you have some really fabulous ones, and you have some that are just terrible, and you have some in the middle. And so in some respects, I don't think that they are doing that much different a job, across the board. Some of them are really great. But how do we continue to innovate? How do we get to these parents then and pull them into the system and make them more aware of what the choices are for their children?
Well, it's the same problem you have with any plan that you try to make, is getting people involved with it. Very often we do things like getting church leaders involved. Mm-hmm. We do things like going into the schools themselves, trying to get the parents to come out. But you can lead a horse to water sometimes, and you have problems. So we do things with the students as well. English as a second language, again, as I mentioned, is a huge problem. So there are courses for English language learners, ELL programs.
Right.
You do have special education in the public schools that doesn't really exist to the same level in charters, and that drives both school cost and outcomes. So there are many programs like that. People who are returning after dropping out of high school, and frankly, the technical schools are doing a very good job of picking up some of these people as well. Some people are not interested in learning necessarily history and English at the higher levels, but they would like to know how to repair a car, how to become an electrician, how to become a plumber, work with their hands. People aren't necessarily good at all sorts of things, and we need those people to be able to learn, and that's why the technical schools have been really a great boon to Connecticut.
Now, the technical schools, if I remember correctly, were recently brought into the same sort of overall administrative grouping with the community colleges and the state university system.
Yes.
So what is the outlook here for community colleges and for educating the population of students who actually stay here in the state? I'm sure you're aware that Connecticut has the highest export rate of young people going away to college, and many of whom never come back. So we educate them in some terrific public school systems in the state and some really good private schools. Then they go away. They don't come back. We have a lot of students here who come through educational systems which perhaps aren't as good. I'm thinking the Norwalk school system versus the Westport one, or the Bridgeport school system versus Trumbull, or I think you can generally find that there are lots of urban situations where students are here, they go to school, and then they come out and we need more education. We need a better educated population if we're going to grow the state economically. So what's the role for community colleges?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head. There are a couple of issues in there. First of all, because Connecticut has such a great educational program, I don't know what state to beat up on, so I'll call it State X. But if Connecticut is the top one or two educational state in the country, then our students are going to be more competitive. They're going to go to bigger cities. I mean, I don't know any 18-year-old who wouldn't want to spend some time in Washington, D.C. or San Francisco or L.A. or New York. I mean, they're going to go where they can, if they can.
Right.
And sometimes they love it and they stay, and sometimes they return. I myself went to school in Washington, D.C. I went to law school in Atlanta, both great towns, both that I really enjoyed, and now I'm back in Connecticut. And I brought my wife with me, who was from Alabama, frankly. So they lost a good one down in Alabama. But the educational system we have here in Connecticut makes our students competitive. The role for community colleges and trade schools and things, to get back to it, really comes down to some of the things we're trying to do with jobs and job training. Companies want to go places where they have an educated, engaged workforce.
Absolutely.
And in order to get those students educated, we are really focusing on saying, everybody's not right for a four-year education. Everybody's not right for an academic education. Again, people want to work with their hands. They want to become electricians so they can install solar panels. They want to become plumbers. We have hydroponic farms where they can work. They're not all traditional careers necessarily, but if we have them educated, and the community colleges play a huge role in that, if we have people educated, then the businesses will want those employees and they will come here, and they have been, frankly, and that's the feedback we're getting from businesses, that one of the reasons they come to Connecticut is for the educated populace.
So we have just a little bit of time left. If you're reelected, what will be your major thrust in the next 2 years?
Same thing it's been for the last 2 years, really, and job creation. I'm always hesitant when I hear a politician talking about how we're going to create jobs, and Mitt Romney and Barack Obama talking about who's going to create more jobs, because government really can only do so much. We have, though, really laid the foundation in the state of Connecticut for job creation. Governor Malloy's First Five program, which is giving tax incentives. Angel investing has been big in the state, so we can have small investors give money to start-up businesses. We've seen some of the benefits of education to some of the businesses that have come here and some of the tax credits they're getting. We've got the Step Up program that's making our returning veterans, and with the drawdowns in the Middle East, there are going to be a lot more returning veterans here. Yeah. We've got those programs to get them jobs and to partner with businesses to train these people, get them employed, and get them working in the state of Connecticut. We need to keep making sure those programs are working, and we certainly need to make sure, especially with people like our veterans, that we get them here, we get them jobs. And if we can't, we need to hear from those people and say, what are your barriers? Improving education, improving access to training, that sort of thing. And that's going to be the focus, again, until the employment rate goes down and until we get out of this recession.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming. I'd love to get back together next year in the session sometime when where we know where we're going with the healthcare situation, and we have got more information now about what's going to happen on the ground in Connecticut, because this is truly going to be a major upheaval in the healthcare system, and hopefully, I think, for the better. But there's a lot of work to be done, and you're going to be right in the middle of it.
That's true enough.
So thanks for coming in.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate you having me and enjoyed being here.
That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. You can find all our shows on YouTube by going to youtube.com/user/DFATVNet. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. Or you can send comments or suggestions for a show to info@dfa-tv.net. If you'd like to learn more about progressive political action, we meet at 7 p.m. on the first Wednesday of the month at the Silver Star Diner in Norwalk. We'd love to have you join us. Remember, change is possible, and you can make it happen. This has been Stream of Conscience, and I'm your host, John Hartwell. Thanks for watching.